Good afternoon, friends. My name is Dami Waldron, and I'm the Director of Alum Engagement at Westtown. Thank you for joining us today for this session. Carolyn Hateman, Dean of Finance and Operations, and Nathan Bone, Class of 1983 and Dean of Enrollment Management, are joining us today to give a financial and enrollment update. This is a live-streamed event, so please type your questions related to enrollment management and finances in the chat. Carolyn and Nathan will try to answer as many questions during the Q&A as possible. Thank you, and I will now pass it to Carolyn and then Nathan.
Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to Alumni Day. Today, I'm going to be presenting a financial update as well as an enrollment update from my colleague. My name is Carolyn Hateman, and I am the Dean of Finance and Operations here at Westtown School. So first, the financial update. I'd like to cover 5 areas today. First, last year, meaning the school year 1920. This school year, meaning 2021. Third, I'd like to cover next year and beyond. Fourth, I'd like to give you a few updates on our endowment fund. And fifth, just a brief update on our debt. And after I complete those five areas of information, then I'll turn it over to my colleague for an enrollment update. So first, number 1, last year. Gonna hop in a little bit of a time machine here and go back to January 6th, 2020. We were in a place where our enrollment was very strong. We had a healthy budget. We had just announced our financial decisions for this school year, including a 3.75% tuition increase, as well as 2.5% in raises. We were awaiting the board approval of our new strategic vision, lighting the way, and we were fully ready for our visiting team to come for the PAIS accreditation. That was January 6, 2020. 2 days later, January 8th, 2020, it's a headline news, just a small headline that China identifies a new virus causing pneumonia-like illness. I'm not sure if you can read the fine print or not, but it refers to not being certain whether it's easily spread or not amongst humans. And I think we know how that headline turned out. So what happened then in March 2020? We canceled our trips and our senior projects. At the time, I was actually, our daughter was a senior and she was scheduled to go on the Ghana trip, and that was canceled. We canceled all of our spring athletics. All of our students had basically a lost spring on campus as everyone was sent home. We engaged in remote learning for the last part of the school year. We also had a virtual alumni weekend, as you may possibly have attended. We had a virtual commencement, and actually my co-presenter and I, we both had daughters in the class of 2020 and gave our daughters their diplomas instead of them being in the Greenwood. Basically, the whole community at that point in March of 2020 was at a distance. As the pandemic, just began to unfold, we started to have some mid-year budget challenges. We certainly had pressure on our tuition, parents asking us about refunds or savings, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We had a lot of fundraising uncertainties. Giving declined 18.5% in the 2 years following the Great Recession. So that was certainly front and center on our minds. And auxiliary revenue, which is an important part of our budget, at the time, there were no spring facility rentals, no summer programs or after school programs, meaning no revenue from any of those sources. Our primary financial concerns at the time were pandemic expenses in the years to come. In the year to come, we had no idea what it would take to run school in a pandemic. And obviously we had pretty serious retention concerns. What was the distance learning experience like for our students? What about our parents and unemployment? We know several people who were laid off. what were the long-term and short-term economic trends, and of course our concerns of our international students, visa issues, travel hurdles. All of these were really on our mind at that time. So how did we respond? Again, this was last year. We took advantage of the CARES Employee Retention Credit, which is a payroll tax credit. We invested in Pennsylvania unemployment insurance. We did freeze hiring at the time and eliminated 4 positions. And we cut expenses where possible. So what was the financial outcome of our response? Happy to report at the time, we actually ended up with a surplus of about $500,000 based on how we responded at the time. And we decided to share that savings with our families, that $500,000. We gave families the option of giving that savings share back to the school, and I'm very happy to report that 400 of our families who were offered a savings share did in turn donate it back to the school. So now we move into this school year. This is the second point I wanted to update you on today. Back in our little time machine, August 2020, what happened? Well, the Chester County Health Department recommended that all schools begin the year online through at least October 9th. So considering that was our health department's recommendation, that's exactly what we did. We began in Westtown distance learning. We did begin to have a small group of boarding students return to campus in September of this school year. The lower school and middle school returned in full on Monday, October 12th. Our upper school returned Monday, October 26th. And since then, more upper school day and boarding students have returned throughout the year. We've had various move-in points throughout the second semester. So the financial impact of the pandemic on the school was both on the revenue side and the expense side. On the revenue side, there were 3 primary impacts to our revenue. The first is that we refunded room and board and lunch for those who had paid and were not using, were not boarding or eating lunch here on campus, and that was about $1 million. Secondly, the board had decided to offer discounts to families who were in distance learning. And we offered a 20% discount on our day tuition to families in the lower school and a 15% discount to our families in the middle school and the upper school. And that totaled about $800,000. Then we also gave away about $500,000 in bridge aid. And bridge aid is in addition to our financial aid. So families that were particularly hard hit by the pandemic, either by a job loss or a business impact, we awarded an additional $500,000 to help them get through and be able to make their tuition payments. On the expense side, it's very expensive to run a school in a pandemic. And here's just a snapshot of where we are at for this year as of last week, April 30th. So far, we've incurred about $1.4 million in COVID operating expenses. And if you're curious what those categories are, the most expensive are our tents. And you can see that in the pie chart picture here. Tents allow us to be able to socially distance during meals and class times, and have been really instrumental in us being able to run our program in a pandemic. Second runner-up is testing. We've invested a lot of money in regular testing as a key mitigation strategy during the pandemic. And then personnel is the third investment that we've made this year, and that is mostly for lower school that allows for smaller cohorts. So clearly a very significant impact running a school in a pandemic. To cover these COVID-related impacts, both on the revenue side and the expense side, what did we do? We have cut expenses wherever possible, not so much in the program, but in other areas such as program support and administration. We reduced capital expenditures, which are projects, bigger projects of $5,000 or more, to only those that were really critical to health and safety and projects that couldn't be deferred for another year. And we will be making an additional draw on our endowment as authorized by the Board of Trustees to cover the additional COVID impacts. The third area that I'd like to cover today is next year, meaning 21-22 and beyond. On the revenue side, just for next year, we did freeze tuition, recognizing where our families are at in this pandemic. Fundraising continues to be a top priority, and I'm happy to report that we're restarting our auxiliary programming. Summer camp will be in full swing, as will our campus rentals, all with appropriate mitigation strategies in place. On the expense side, we froze salaries for 1 year, and we also continue to engage in zero-based budgeting. So for all of our 40-some budget managers who have budgets to manage, they start with zero and figure out what they're going to need. And so that has been an effective strategy for us in non-pandemic years, but in this year and coming year as well. I'm not clear yet what our shortfalls will be, if any, between revenue and expenses. More time to be able to figure that out. But if there are shortfalls, there may be additional endowment draws for the next year or two. Time will tell. And we'll continue to be planning, and more planning. See, I even included an exclamation point there. The detailed budgeting for next year is well underway and continuing to be refined. 10-year cash flow projections have been completed and also will be refined in the years to come. And just as important, our investment committee will continue to carefully tend to our endowment and make sure that is well stewarded in the years to come. Speaking of the endowment, that's the fourth area that I'd like to give you a brief update about. Currently, our investment committee is meeting quarterly. When the market is acting a bit unpredictably, we will meet more often as necessary. Our investment committee is guided by our investment policy, and that is reviewed annually. And for those of you who have inquired, I'm happy to report that we have moved significant amount of our endowment into ESG and SRI holdings. And for those who are wondering about those initials, I've included them there. Very happy to report that we have reached recently a new high balance of $120 million. Very grateful that it has been well stewarded and we've reached that amount, but there's a little bit more to the story. As you'll hear from Nathan next, our need-based financial aid in a given year is about $10 million. Our endowment draw, as guided by the investment policy, is 4.5%, which is roughly $5.4 million. So our Westtown fund is about another 1.2 million, which leaves us, unfortunately, still with a shortfall of about $3.4 million of being able to cover our financial aid of $10 million. That shortfall needs to be covered by our operating budget every year, and that's not unique to a pandemic year. That's always been the case. And so for that reason, I want to emphasize that it's really important that we continue to grow the endowment and our annual giving capacity in the years to come. Last, I'd like to give you an update about our debt. It's taking you on a little trip down debt memory lane. Starting in 2002, the first time I believe the school has ever taken out or had bonds. And at the time, we took out $16 million in facilities bonds, and I footnoted there what that money was used for. Primarily the construction of Balderston, which is our 9th grade dorm, as well as additions to the lower school and Bacon Cottage. Some renovations certainly to the main building, and parking and construction improvements throughout campus. You can see at the time that our endowment was $56 million in 2002. In 2012, when interest rates were very good, we refinanced that debt, and the balance at the time was $12.9 million, and our endowment balance then was $77 million. Fast forward to today, 2021, our debt balance is about $10.2 million, and as I mentioned previously, our endowment is $120 million. So that kind of gives you a recap of our debt over the past several decades. What we're in the process of doing right now is refinancing our existing debt of $10.2 million, especially with interest rates being so low. And we're looking to add possibly another $15 to $20 million of debt subject to board approval. And the reason we're exploring adding new debt is primarily three reasons. One is interest rates, as you probably know, are historically low. Two, we have a very strong balance sheet that supports more debt. And three, we have several capital projects that have little fundraising appeal, and that additional debt could be used for those capital projects. Should we choose to add more debt, there'll be a committee formed that will make recommendations for the use of those funds to the board. I'd now like to turn over this presentation to my friend and colleague, Nathan Bone. He's our Dean of Enrollment Management, and he will be providing your enrollment update. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. My name is Nathan Bone. I'm the Dean of Enrollment. My child, Avery, just graduated last spring from Westtown after having come here in second grade, and I'm the class of 1983. There are 483 alums working here at Westtown, so it's pretty fun to be here. I'm going to cover enrollment and some things around enrollment. So prior to COVID, Westtown had grown and exceeded our strategic plan targets for 5 consecutive years. We were really proud of this. The recession in 08 had created some challenges for us, and we brought focus to it and got it back up. Then in COVID this past year, we dropped a little bit, but we're still feeling pretty good about where we are. The key to strong enrollment is keeping the kids you've got, right? For 8 consecutive years, our retention has exceeded the independent school average. This past year, going into 2021, it dropped a little bit, but it was still very good. Some of those, we did have a few more families not able to return for various COVID reasons. But as Carolyn mentioned, we did a lot of work financially to try to support those for whom that was a challenge. A question I was asked recently that I thought would be interesting to talk about is when students join Westtown. More and more of our alumni lately have started at Westtown sooner than high school. I came in 10th grade as a boarding student, but you'll see from this chart that 66% of our students join Westtown in lower or middle school. So those divisions and those entry points are really important to us. Only now about 19% of our students come as domestic boarding students, like I did. Diversity, if you've been reading anything we've been sending in the last couple of years, you know this is an important focus for Westtown. We have grown our diversity of students intentionally and steadily, especially since 2008-09, where we've grown it from under 20% to well over 30 and on our way to the high 30% range in the next year or two. We're also proud that that diversity is across all 3 divisions, that growth. It is more challenging in lower middle school because in the upper school, because we're a boarding school, we can get students from all over the country. And here we can, in the middle and lower school, they need to be local, but we have made progress. Lower middle school remain the 2 divisions that need the most work, but we have shown that we can do it and we'll continue to make progress there. Community-based organizations are one of the ways we attract students of color to Westtown School. The key organizations include A Better Chance, the Oliver Foundation, New Jersey Seeds, and the White Foundation. In the last 4 years, we have enrolled 30 students from these organizations, which is an average is better than our previous 18-year average. So we're pleased with our work with these organizations. some great students come from those places. Another issue that is frequently asked by alumni is how has the change in the boarding requirement affected enrollment? So just as a reminder, we did not eliminate the boarding requirement. The board elected to modify it. So the requirement as it exists today is that if you enroll at Westtown in 8th, 9th, or 10th grade, you have to board 11th and 12th, as was always true. If you enroll in Westtown in 7th grade or earlier, you can choose to be a day student through all of your high school career. What's been fascinating is since we made that change in 2014, local students choosing to board before 11th grade have effectively replaced those upper school students who choose not to board in 11th or 12th grade. And before we made this change, it was very unusual to have a local child choose to board in 9th or 10th grade. So whereas we thought the requirement was communicating that you needed to board in 11th and 12th, it was obviously also suggesting to people that you shouldn't board until 11th and 12th. And when we changed that requirement, more local families chose to have their children come on dorm in 9th or 10th grade than had ever done that before. So on dorm, we now have the kids on dorm who really want to be there, including 9th and 10th graders, and the students who don't want to be there are not there, and that's good for them as well as for the school. So this change, I talked about retention earlier, this change was important to improving our retention from 8th to 9th grade and from 5th to 6th, actually. As early as then, parents started to think about that looming requirement. So we've been pleased with this outcome and surprised by it. We did not expect local families to elect to board sooner than they had before. Need-based aid is another question that I get a lot from alumni. Where does it go? Who gets it? So 45% of our students, 313 kids, receive over $10 million in financial aid. The bulk of that aid does go to the upper boarding students, in part because the tuition is the highest there, and because it just takes more support, more financial support to enable kids to come on dorm and live here at Westtown School. But you can see we do spend a fair amount of money in lower middle school and even upper day students who will eventually become upper boarding students. In terms of types of students receiving that award, over half are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. About 25% are US white or international students. We don't give a lot of aid to international students, a little bit. About 10% go to Quaker families and children, and about 10% go to legacy families. An important note is that obviously a student can be in multiple categories, so kids are effectively double counted potentially or triple counted in this chart, but it directionally gives you the sense of scale as to where the money is going. That's it. That's our presentation. Thank you, and we're ready to take questions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Not many questions came through, and that's pretty obvious because that was a pretty thorough presentation. So I'm going to ask Nathan and Carolyn a question that I have that you all may be wondering about. So you all gave a great overview of how we are impacted currently by the COVID-19 crisis, but what do you see some of the long-term and short-term effects on enrollment and finances as we sort of transition out of the pandemic?
You want to go first?
I'll go first,
Okay,
sure.
Go ahead.
So I think the United States is now obviously doing a better job than a lot of countries at controlling the pandemic. So a potential lingering effect could be limitations on travel internationally. About 60 students in our upper school are from somewhere overseas. So if that continues to be impacted or inhibited or delayed, that could be a challenge for us. And then also potentially the vaccine status of those students who are coming to us from other countries that are not vaccinating as effectively as we are now in the United States could be a challenge. And then we hope this is not true, but if for some reason next year the situation flares up again in the United States and we have to go back to distance learning, anytime we have to do that, that's disconcerting to parents when you're paying tuition, no matter how much it is, you don't want to be paying and have your kids in your own house. And our program really hinges really critically on being with the children. So that could be a challenge for us. My hope is that neither of those scenarios play out that way, and that we will, starting next year, be really pretty much back to something close to normal and growing from there.
And I would just add that I think a big unknown is how our parent body will rebound themselves financially, because that does impact how much money they're applying for financial aid. So some of our families weren't affected at all by the pandemic financially. Some families were deeply, deeply affected, and many were somewhere in between. So not, depending on the industries in which our families work, I'm guessing there'll be lingering effects financially to our parents, which in turn has an impact on our financial aid requests.
Thank you for that. So we did get one question in, and it's from Kent July. He asked, what is the size of the admissions team, Nathan? And what are the demographics of the team? And how does the team work during COVID-19 to recruit?
Wow, okay. So we have 9 total staff. That's not 9 FTEs though, because we have 3 people who work parts of jobs. In terms of recruiting, we really have 4 upper school admissions counselors. Of those 4, 1 is currently African American. Since in the whole time I've been here, we've always had an adult of color in the upper school counseling group, either Latinx or African American. We have 1 counselor that handles all of pre-K through 8 admission, and then myself and 2 staff. COVID was absolutely a challenge for our work. I think especially for a school like Westtown, it really helps for students and families to see the school in action and to walk the campus. We had to do all that virtually. I feel like we did a good job at replicating as much as we could the information and process we do, but that was a challenge. And then all of our team was, with the exception of me, pretty much was working from home. So there was also the team dynamic, which I think we did well. But I'm looking forward to having people back next year. It is a very personal face-to-face business. Finding a match for your child, or being a rising 9th grader and assessing the match for you is better done if you can see it in person. When we moved once, my wife was looking for houses online and she was sure she had found 3 great ones. And when we showed up in Cincinnati and looked, they were all horrible. And that was a lesson for me way back then, that it is shopping online for big, important purchases is not easy. So I'm hoping people, whether they picked us or didn't, find when they get there that they're in the right place.
Thank you, Nathan. And I believe that is all of the questions that came in. So with that being said, I want to thank Carolyn and Nathan for joining us today. And as always, if you guys have other questions, you can email me and I'll forward them to Carolyn and Nathan. And my email is dami.waldron@westtown.edu. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of Virtual Alums Weekend. Bye.